Hey guys, Jarretman here, back with some more 500 Zoom. Just going to be two-tabling. I've been playing the pool a little bit, messing up my recordings. I've already failed twice at that, so hopefully this time is the video that you'll actually see. One time I messed up the sound settings, and the other time I had my HUD on, which I don't really want to do for these videos anymore. Okay, so let's get into it this time. I am drinking coffee as well, so if you hear me sipping, I apologize. Table 2 not strong enough to continue versus a 3-bet. Same thing on table 1. Jack 10 off, just not quite strong enough. Those off-suited broadways don't get continued in that position. Except for king queen off and ace queen off and ace jack off get continued. 5-4 off versus 2.5x on the button, not quite strong enough. Same for queen 7 off. They would both be continues versus min raise. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for those comments about where poker is opening. I'm always curious to hear where live poker is open and where live poker is not open, as there are some casinos that are reopening, but of course they don't have poker. Here in Canada, I don't think there's any public live poker going on in any part of the country, I believe. I am a live poker player, so I'm always secretly hoping for poker to come back quickly. As much as as much as online can be fun sometimes, I overall much prefer to play live poker. Helps me keep my sanity. Table 2 not strong enough to continue versus the 3-bet, even being a bit deeper. 10-9 off is just a hand that is very reversed. 5s, however, we will continue. Versus the 4x 3-bet from the big blind, we will continue slightly wider than if you use the larger sizing, of course. In table 2, we're going to 4-bet sometimes, but we get a call this time. Jacks versus small blind, you can 4-bet, you can call. We are a bit deeper, so I think calling makes a little bit more sense, but I still like mixing in some 4-bets there. We're overall, I wouldn't say way ahead, but overall we're very ahead of his 3-betting range in terms of equity with pocket jacks. In table 1, maybe we need to float these low pairs some of the time versus 1/4. Maybe like 25% of the time we have to. I'm not exactly sure on the triple Broadway board versus 1/4, but I'm going to make the fold. In table 2, I like checking back with jacks here. We don't require that much protection because the only hand that has 2 overs versus us is ace queen, and I think if we bet like 1/3 or something on the flop, ace queen is going to continue anyways. So the only way we could bet jacks for protection on the flop is to bet for the larger size, and I think that's a little bit too thin. There's a lot of value, I think, in bluff catching later streets. Also, I think we're up against pocket queens a lot, to be honest. People often bet pocket 10s here, pocket 9s, pocket 8s. They bet those on the flop because they need some protection. The only hand that really doesn't need protection on the flop is pocket queens, or like a weak king. It's always suspicious when people check the king high flops as the 3-better. But it makes sense here being deeper on the wet board, actually. I roll my low number on table 2, and I think I'm going to make the fold. I no longer think we're up against pocket queens that often. Oh man, this is so close. I rolled my low number, so I'll make the fold, but I think that might even be a pure call. I think if we had jacks, pocket jacks with the jack of hearts and jack of diamonds, it would be a pure call. as we're blocking king jack of diamonds and king jack of hearts, which are both hands that could potentially check the flop and then take this line bet. When we have the jack of clubs, we don't block as many king x as if we had the jack of diamonds, because he doesn't 3-bet king jack offsuit from the small blind. Ace 4 off, not quite strong enough to continue there. That spot's really annoying, actually. I think we still need to call this combo some of the time on the river. Table 1, I'm considering calling with the weaker player in the big blind. And yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Well, if I 3-bet, I might have got 4-bet jammed and had to fold, so we can think of it like that. Hopefully he had a hand that was going to jam either way. I guess potentially he could have queens. Like GTO wise, he can have queens on the river. He should have queens on the river. And of course he can have lots of bluffs. The problem in this spot is that I feel like a lot of the bluff candidates just always end up betting the flop. But that's not true, of course, GTO wise. Like GTO wise, you're gonna check a lot of hands on the flop. If you're developing a checking range, it's not going to be, just pocket queens and weak king X. It's going to contain a lot of hands, not to mention hands that can check raise the flop. Table 2, we're gonna mix between calling and 3-betting. We're a bit deeper as well, so the value of these suited wheel aces goes up significantly, being deeper. Very high frequency check back, I think, with ace 3 on this flop, considering the under the gun range and my calling range. Maybe even a pure check. And now on the turn, I think we have to call 1. Our range is very protected because we can have a lot of jack X that check back the turn. Sorry, that check back the flop. So I feel like we can fold the river, although I'm not liking it. It's not like we don't have a lot of jack X in our range, not to mention, considering those positions, we can have lots of 2-pair as well. His bluff candidates are going to be mostly low pairs that check the flop. Table 1, without the diamond blocker, I think this hand class mostly just check gives up on the turn. I think with, for example, the ace of diamonds, or even maybe the 5 of diamonds, we could barrel the turn, even for like the overbet. And now on the river, we are going to bet, and we roll a 98, so we will go for the overbet. We won't just have ace king here when we go for the overbet on the river. The worst hand we could do this with, I believe, would be a hand like jack 10 maybe. And we won't barrel all of our ace king on the turn here. Ace king can make a nice check call hand on the turn, as we are way ahead of hands like 10-9 or king 10, or even a hand like 9-8. So we have a gut shot to the nuts here on table 1. relatively neutral board in the sense that we don't have Jack 5 off, Jack 3 off, but we do have some 5-3 off that he doesn't have. Not to mention potentially even 5-3 suited that he doesn't have, depending on what range he's opening. And it's a relatively dynamic board, which tends to favor the in-position player. I'm going to go for the raise on table 1. We get our high number, and we can 100% check back a decent amount of jacks on the flop, and we're just repping a jack now on the turn. He can have jack X as well. I think we're both going to discount some of our jack X combos on the flop because he should be betting some of them and I should be betting some of them. Anyways, I don't think this is a very high frequency play. Okay, this is an interesting river card. Oh, wow, okay. I'm not expecting to see this line bluffed, maybe ever. But this would just be a ridiculous fold. He could still be protection betting maybe a hand like ace jack who thinks that a worse jack could check back now on the flush. So I'm going to make the call. I hate this spot. Oh, he does have a bluff. Okay, I was wrong. I kind of like his line. I kind of like his line. I feel like if I had a weak jack, I would have folded. Yeah. I like his line, actually. Theory-wise, I don't know if there's many leads on the 6 of heart river, considering how the ranges are constructed on the turn. We can fold the ace-6 off on table 2. So on the turn, so flop goes check check. He can, if he's playing, you know, a relatively balanced checking range, if he's playing anything sort of reasonable, he's going to have a very diverse range on the turn. He's going to have still some flush draws. He's going to have, I will make the call here with the ace-4 of hearts. He's going to have some flush draws. He's going to have some jack X. He's going to have some over pairs and under pairs even when he bets that size. So like a hand like pocket sixes might want to bet the turn because it needs some protection. And then when I raise him, I'm basically saying I have a jack X. You know, some of my bluffs are going to be flush draws, but I feel like a lot of my flush draws that check back the turn are not going to raise the river like that frequently. Sorry, raise the turn that frequently. Like I will raise it some of the time. We roll a 4-bet on table 2 here. This hand is going to mix between all 3 options. And we're a little deeper, so I'm going to size up a little bit. And table 1, we're going to go for the overbet. Just targeting an ace-x if the small blind overcalled with a hand like ace-jack, and the under the gun, well, cutoff in this spot, the cutoff player could still potentially have an ace, and we're not betting the turn very thin there. Even if we have a weak ace, it's not like we love betting the turn. So I think we're very polar on the turn, so I think an overbet can definitely make sense. Sorry, I took away the hand. So yeah, I feel like any flush draw that he checked the flop with and then bet the turn with, basically any flush draw that's above like a 10 high flush draw can continue on the turn versus my raise. So he does have a considerable amount of flushes, I guess. The problem is that yeah, I'm uncapped. He's relatively uncapped, I guess, but neither of us can really have 2 pair that much. Like on the flop, I wouldn't check back jack 5 or jack 3. Yeah, interesting spot overall, that's for sure. King 6 suited, we will 4-bet or fold. Table 2, I'm going to go for the small bet. It's nice to include some of these nutty hands in your small betting range in a spot where a lot of your range wants to bet small for protection. You might see some sims cutoff versus button that mixes in 4 bets at low frequency with some of these middle pairs like 7s, 8s, 9s. And I think that's totally fine. It's a good board for the cutoff here on table 1, table 2. Good board in the sense that we flop 3 sets, basically full frequency. And anytime you flop 3 sets, you're doing better equity-wise as the cutoff. And we roll a call. Versus the 1/3 size, we will be raising some like mergey protection hands. And versus the larger size, if you bet, let's say, pot on the flop, I think we only want to raise like protection hands. We don't really want to raise sets that often versus the very large size. But pocket threes, I think, is going to almost always raise. Gonna go for the call again on table 2. It's nice to call down with sets some of the time. But just remember, you don't need a set to call him down when he's bluffing. So anytime that, oh, he does have a 9. That's a bit annoying. Annoying in the sense that we could have jammed the turn and got called. But that's just results wise. I think calling the turn with the set there some of the time is decent. I think this is a pretty good board on table 1 for our big blind ISO range versus the small blind limp, as will most boards. Easy fold versus that size in with our hand. I think most boards are going to favor the big blind ISO range, while our range will have some junky air hands like queen 8 offsuit some of the time. It's going to be mostly linear despite having the junky part. And his range is going to be mostly capped, as he won't trap like any overpair that he limped the small blind with. He's going to continue with a capped preflop range, so that usually means that the board is better for the big blind. If we get 4-bet table 2, I'm going to just call. Being a bit deeper, I think if we wanted to continue like all of our range as just a 4-bet, all of our range versus the 4-bet, if we wanted to continue that as just a call, being in position, especially under the gun versus button, where the ranges are a bit tighter, I think continuing our entire range as a call would be very reasonable. His range here is going to be like, even queens this deep doesn't love 4-betting these spots, which is bad news when we have pocket kings, but he should still have queens at some frequency, and he should have obviously ace king, ace queen as his main bluff candidates, as well as some suited kings. And on the flop, we could do some raising here, but I think I prefer calling. The way that this hand plays, the way that these ranges play in reality, I think I prefer calling the flop. It's not like we're capped, and he's going to be aware that we're not capped. Okay, we get our low number. We will check back on table 2. We could have potentially overcalled there with the 7-8 suited. The turn on table 2 is better for us than it is for him, because he doesn't really 4-bet pocket 10s or pocket 9s for that matter at these stack depths. Our bluffs on table 2 are going to have to be flush draws that peeled the flop, or potentially a hand like ace king ourselves, But even ace-king ourselves likely wants to check back the river. And then for him, his hero calls, I think, are going to be mostly 10x, like ace-10 suited. And then maybe even some ace-highs have to hero call on the river. I think most of his aces and kings are going to end up in a bet line. However, he should trap some aces on the turn, potentially even on the flop. It's just a tough spot to get paid with kings in this spot, to be honest. Being deeper and being in button versus under the gun. It's tough to get value with kings here. 100 big blinds deep, this spot is great for kings. Like you very happily will 5-bet jam pre-flop. But people just won't get in 200 big blinds with pocket queens here that happily. So nothing to do but call here on table 2. I don't think we want to have any raises on this texture. I also think that we should be checking back a huge portion of our range on this texture. The big blind has a nutted advantage. He has a 2-pair advantage, a straight advantage. We don't have any flop straights. He has both the suited combos of flop straights. We have the backdoor flush draw here in the gut shot on table 1, but it is a reverse gut shot versus the large size. Gonna make a very nitty fold on table 1. I think that's likely not a fold considering we have the backdoor flush draw, but c'est la vie. And now table 2, I think we have another clear continue even versus the overbet. Our ace can be an out, a 5 can be an out. He can still overbet the turn with a hand as thin as 8-7 potentially. It is a little bit thin though. I think we have an easy fold now on the river, unfortunately. I think if we had ace-3 of spades on the turn, it would be a fold. And then I think with ace-5 of spades, we can continue. There exists a universe where he checks the river and we check back and win. I don't think that happens very often, but I think it happens some of the time, enough to justify calling the turn there. The turn isn't really his favorite card range-wise because we can have Jack-9 suited. And while he also can have Jack-9 suited, he was just doing much better on the flop than he is on a turn where we can also have the nuts. So table 2, these are the types of boards where a larger bet at equilibrium makes some sense, but we roll a low number. We'll go for the small bet. Also simplifying to just checking back or betting small is a fine strategy, I think. I don't think you lose that much EV by doing it. But you definitely will gain some EV by playing a more polar betting strategy here, especially on 10-4 deuce specifically, where we're unlikely to have pocket twos. Okay, and we'll make the call. Like when we open hijack, we might not have 2s and 4s full frequency. Especially 2s. I don't think we should have it full frequency. So then he has a slight nutted advantage on the flop because he's not going to 3-bet pocket 10s at full frequency. 2 annoying spots in a row versus Dino. I don't think we get to fold queens yet though. Queen of Diamonds isn't our favorite card to have, as it blocks some of his flush draws that'll take this line. But then on the river, I think he wants to give up mostly with those flush draws. The jack doesn't improve any of his hands. All right, we're gonna call half the time on table 2. We get a call. Sucks I'm running out of time bank there. I would have liked to have had more time to think about that decision rather than just saying, okay, I'll call half the time. That wasn't an informed decision. That was, I have 5 seconds left. I'll just call some of the time, which is not the best strategy, of course. So what I was thinking briefly before I decided I would call half the time is that, so first of all, I don't beat any value. Jacks with the jack of clubs. This is kind of close on table 1, even versus the 75% sizing. I think I'll peel here. Jacks without a club is a very clear fold versus that size, though. So yeah, the jack doesn't improve any of his hands because I don't think he gets to overbet the turn with any hands that are, like, for example, Jack 10 of spades. I don't think really wants to overbet the turn. I guess it could. But if he has a hand like Jack 10 of hearts or Jack 7 of diamonds, I don't think either of those end up overbetting the turn ever. So the only hand that he improves to on the river is a naked jack. If he had ace jack of diamonds, for example, he could improve to ace jack on the river, but that hand wouldn't shove the river. So he's repping set. He doesn't have any flop 2 pair because he would fold all those hands. So he's repping sets, 10-7 suited that raise the flop. And then picked up a 7 on the turn, which is very reasonable. 10-7 suited can 100% raise the flop. Table 2 is an interesting spot. It's a balance between, do I want an overbet in a spot where I'm capped because of my preflop range? Or do I want to go for the normal bet, even though I'm betting polar? Because I'm basically saying I have an 8. An ace, maybe we can bet for this size, which is nice to protect that range by having some 8s in it. Because if we have a hand like any ace, we might want to bet some of the time here on the river. And we got called by a queen, which is reasonable, so that's one of the reasons why we would want to bet an ace, obviously. I'm going to go for the half pot bet here on table 1. It's not an amazing board for the big blind, but I think it is better. We don't squeeze 5s and 4s. That's the problem with this board. And we don't even really squeeze 5-4 suited that much. And the cutoff, I think in this case, can have all of those hands as well as pocket 10s. Pocket 10s doesn't really want to 4-bet here. So we're at a very small nut disadvantage, I would say, on the flop. However, I think our overpair and suited Broadway and even suited 10x advantage. No, we don't have a suited 10x advantage. I think our overpair advantage is enough to justify betting pretty frequently on this board. And given that it was a squeeze pre-flop, there is... we're 200 big blinds deep here. I'm tempted to call versus the small 3-bet sizing. 7-4 suited is just such a garbage hand, though. It just has such low playability and visibility. I'll make the fold. I don't know there. Like it's already only an open on the button because I'm 200 big blinds deep with the big blind. So it's the absolute bottom of my range. So if I'm calling that, I guess what am I folding? I guess the off-suited hands, but so yeah, our overpairs here are the reason why we can bet pretty frequently. Again, we are 300 big blinds effective, maybe pocket jacks. Mixes in some calls versus the button, whereas 100 big blinds deep, it would potentially, not potentially, it would want to 3-bet pure. If I had 7-5 suited versus that 3-bet, I would never fold, given that we're deeper, but 7-4 suited is already a borderline open. I was going to open the 6-3 suited there. King 6 suited, I think we can 4-bet this some of the time. I think I'm going to 4-bet it 25% of the time, given these positions, and then fold the rest. These suited kings, you'll see mix in some 4-bets. Having the king blocker in that position seems to be more relevant than having the ace blocker, as he has a lot of hands that are going to 3-bet and then fold that have an ace in them. I think he has less hands that 3-bet and fold that have a king in them. So that's why you'll see some of the solutions mostly folding the queen 10 off on table 1 versus that size in those positions. That's why you'll see some pre-flop charts or solutions that will 4-bet those weird suited kings in those spots. I think it's a pure blocker reason. It's not like king 6 suited has better equity when called than a hand like ace 6 suited. However, it will choose to use it as a 4-bet bluff while it will fold ace 6 suited pure, for example. At least in some solutions that I've seen. That is a terrifying avatar. Jeez. Alright, we're going to call the small blind versus what I'm assuming is a weaker player. Oh, man. This is not a thing that I do normally. They squeeze to such a small size too, and I'm getting such a good price with the suited ace. Yeah, okay. We'll make the call. I hate having ace 7 suited here because it's a hand that is just so often reversed. But we can, like it's 7 big blinds into a pot that's going to be, what was it, like 27 big blinds? Oh, 26.4. It's right there. But that's after the rake. And we have a suited ace. Such an annoying spot. Well, we can't fold the flop, and I don't think there's a lot of merit in raising for protection, because if he is bluffing, he could have a hand like ace queen, ace king, which we don't mind letting him see the turn, because if he hits an ace, we're very likely to stack them. If he jams the turn, I'm going to fold. I don't think people find enough jams with ace king, king queen type hands in this spot. If he does find a jam with those hands, it's usually a flush draw. And he squeezed pre-flop from the big blind, so potentially his range will include less of those hands. I'm not sure. It's still close, to be honest. It's still close, but I'm going to make the fold. Like, we would rather call ace 7 here on the turn than a hand like pocket jacks, I guess, because it just has more outs when it's behind. This whole hand is a disaster from the beginning. I make the exploitative call in the small blind, then we get squeezed to an extremely small size, and we make the overcall with the suited ace, which again, that could just be a fold. The hand should have just been, fold twice pre-flop, but instead I make some deviations and then get punished for it. Sounds pretty standard. We're gonna call check raise like a very small percentage of the time on table 2. I don't really like leading in this spot specifically, especially when the person bets 1/3, as when they bet 1/3, their 2x range won't be diluted as much. The 2-5 suited versus pot size we can fold. So if the player is playing a large bet or check strategy on the flop, 2x wants to mostly check back. So when he bets large and we call, we have a 2x advantage. But when he bets small and we call, it's like we have a small 2x advantage, but not that much. And I think we have an easy fold now with our king high. We will have to continue some ace highs. A hand like ace jack, for example. But king jack, I think we can fold. We might even have enough equity to call, but we don't have the right EV to call. Again, this is a spot where I'm tempted to make the call on the small blind. But I think Jack 10 off is just not strong enough to do that. Like when I'm making the exploitative calls in the small blind, when there's a person that I assume is a weaker player in the big blind, I like to do it with hands that play better multi-way. Because don't forget, we're going to be out of position against two players. It doesn't matter if your opponents are playing suboptimally. If you are, out of position versus both of them, you can't do anything about it. Some of you will remember that challenge. I think it was Tom Dwan or someone who was playing against a recreational player heads up, and he offered them the button 2 out of 3 hands instead of half the time, and he just got crushed. It turns out the button's a lot more valuable than knowing how to play perfect. I like mostly betting here on table 2. In fact, I think king 9 works better as a pure bet than it does as a check back some of the time. And I don't want to go too crazy with overbets. The solver will mix in some overbets here as the big blind doesn't have that many 2x. And again, not blocking diamonds. We do block a hand like king jack of hearts that would float the flop maybe, but yeah, I'm just gonna go for the triple here. We get called by queen always, and we get him to fold his draws and lower pairs, I guess. We don't block any of his folds, I think, with king 9. King 9 of hearts especially. King 9 of clubs would be a worse river bluff, but king 9 of hearts is a really nice river bluff. King 9 of spades, king 9 of hearts. And we'll call table 1 versus the 4-bet. It's a bit of a smaller 4-bet than usual, which means we have to continue wider versus the 4-bet. Which also leads to more trapping, actually. So if someone min raises you here, for example, you're going to be trapping aces way more often. It's weird how it works, but that's just how it works, because when there's more dead money in there, like when he 4-bets to a larger size, the value of just jamming aces becomes better because there's just more dead money out there and he has to call more often because of the price he's getting. I'm just considering whether or not we want to ever check raise here with pocket 10s with the 10 of spades, and I think the answer is no. I think we want to check raise more with a hand like king queen than we want to check raise with a hand like 10s. Because on the flop, if he has a hand like ace 5 suited or ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, even ace 10 offsuit, he can have some outs, but I think we're just doing very well. And now on the river, I'm just thinking like what hands call us that don't bet themselves. And I guess the answer is ace 5 suited, ace jack, ace queen. And I think those hands find more calls than they do folds on the river. When he snap folds, I guess he had a hand like queens or jacks. So obviously we get snapped off by his traps like aces and kings, and we get snapped off by ace king. But if he has ace queen or ace jack, I don't think he finds the value bet on the river. Pocket 7s will call like half the time here versus that size. These are very tight 3-betting positions, hijack versus cutoff. Significantly tighter than hijack versus button, for example. And then 7s with the 7s of diamond, 7s with the 7 of diamonds on this flop. We will continue, especially versus the small size. I think 2s and 3s, when we do have them in our range, like the very small percentage of the time, like to mix some raises on the flop. And even this hand can start to mix some raises on the flop. We get a 72. Yeah, I don't hate raising with the 7s here. If we start doing it all the time, though, it's very easy to play against us. Yeah, I think maybe like a 10% raise is a thing with pocket sevens on the flop. We want to be raising when we have 5-4 suited. We want to be raising when we have fours, when we have fives, calling sometimes, but raising a lot. When we have king queen and ace queen, we want to be raising as well some of the time. So it's not like we're raising that much, but we do want to have some flop check raises here. We want to be playing aggressively, otherwise the in position 3-better just has a very easy spot. Do I ever want to bluff with the pocket sevens here? Blocking his 6-7 suited isn't that much of a thing. He doesn't have that many combos as 6-7 suited. Not to mention combos as 6-7 suited that would check back the turn. Okay, we'll go for the check on table 1. We could still even check raise it. We're a bit deeper. We're 150 big blinds to start the hand, and we don't have 2s or 3s, which he can have 2s and 3s. 48. Yeah, with king queen, I like to start overbetting here. If we had ace queen, ace jack, ace king, I think those hands want to check, check more often. So table 2, yeah, here's the thing, like in theory this might be a good bluff candidate, but we're not blocking the hands that we want to block actually. And I get my low number. I'll just go for the fold. And table 1, we get our low number. We can't bluff every time when we have king queen here. I think if we find bets on the turn with objectively weaker hands, those hands might find a pure jam on the river. For example, a hand like maybe jack 10 of spades. If we find the bet on the turn, we need to bet it on the river pure. But I think if we're just bluffing every single one of our overcards, I really don't believe him, but we can't do anything about it. This line really makes no sense from him. He's saying he either check back a set on the flop, or he rivered a straight or a full house with like pocket fours, or he called us pre-flop with a hand like ace 2 suited. Yeah, I don't know. That hand doesn't really make much sense in my opinion. That sizing for him to use on the river, like I guess he could be jamming thin with a hand like pocket queens that just called pre-flop because we were a bit deeper. So I guess, yeah, pocket queens makes sense. But like even jacks is a little thin on the river, I think. Okay, I'm going to play this hand, and that's going to be it for this video. King 9 suited, we will 3-bet half the time here. And table 1, we're going to bet some of the time, check back some of the time. Given the way the action went, I don't think blocking a pair on the board is that relevant for our bluff raises, so I kind of like this hand to bluff raise. And we get a 71. We don't want to be bluff raising too much in this spot. Oh, he does have a full house. Okay. I was going to say the way that the action played out, I didn't think blocking a pair on the board was that relevant, as I think people would, despite the 4 straight out there, I think people would lead to pair on the turn for the small size very often. But it makes sense for him to check it some of the time. All right, that's it for this video, guys. I will see you in the next one.